Greetings and hello back to the Miasmata show. Today I wanted to talk about something that I missed last time about my trip from the left to the right. I wanted to talk about why I was a Democrat in the 90s and the 2000s. So one of the big contentious issues of the modern democratic left in America is the notion of social justice. Back in the day, when I was studying this issue in sociology, had a much different definition than it does today. But the modern definition is, according to Google, justice in terms of distribution of wealth, opportunities, privilege within a society. Now, that's actually a very alarming definition if you think about it. It's essentially communism. That's the aim goals of communism. Back in my day, social justice was more of inequality of life, equality of opportunity, not all of this added on tat. In the 90s, the Democrats were seen as more of the libertarian, the liberal groups, meaning to be free. They stand for individual liberty, to be able to choose the things you wanted in life, to choose your path. And above all, they were pushing for things like modern technology. They were pushing for, green. They were pushing for economic policies that would allow people to become more equal. That was the point. You made everyone more equal by raising all ships in the water, not just a few. And the Democrats horribly, horribly failed because they didn't want to fund projects that they didn't get votes from. The problem with the two-party system, particularly with the Democrats, whose design is to care for the downtrodden, according to Jordan Peterson. You're supposed to take care of the disenfranchised and the downtrodden. And you do that by helping them. But the reason the Democratic Party does not want and does not wish to help them is because it goes antithetical to their values. Because if you help somebody economically get ahead in life, they're going to become a Republican. I have a saying that I like to tell people, especially my father. If you want people to vote Democrat, you take away their jobs and you promise them money. If you want people to vote Republican, you give them good paying jobs and they'll want to keep their money. A lot of this comes down to economics. I mean, as much as we'd like to say, oh, it's the policies and oh, it's this and that, social policies are like the wind. It changes every day. But economic policies are where people pay attention to their pocketbooks. In the last election, some of the last reviews that came out studying the election found that the most common voter for Trump was not some internet troll. It was actually somebody that watched normal mainstream television news, was the average Trump voter. So he wasn't elected by 4chan as much as we like to think so. He wasn't elected by radical right-wingists like Richard Spencer and the alt-right. That's just not true. He represented a classic conservatism, himself being a conservative Democrat. Now, why is our party so divided? Because in the 90s you had conservative Democrats, conservative Republicans, liberal Democrats, and liberal Republicans. A lot of this came down in the breakdown of the micro elections or the micro voting within states. What ended up happening is something called gerrymandering. If you're curious, look up gerrymandering. It was known for um, Democratic and Republican candidates to change the voting districts in each state so that they could capture the majority of votes in one area to reduce the amount of power they had in one area. For instance, if everyone lived in the city and you had the conservative voters outside of the city, you could make the city one district and then make all the outside areas separate districts and have them be equal voting power to each district. Therefore, the minority would have tyranny over the majority. And this happened in many states. It happened in California, Texas, it's happened in every state. Now, why would somebody choose to do such a thing? Is it to fight demographics? Is it to secure power? Well, it's a little bit of all of it. The problem is with gerrymandering, it works on the short-term solution, and that's the problem, is politicians are very short-term. They don't want to give you a long-term solution. They want you to come back for more because they want your vote. And if they don't have your vote, they are not interested in helping you. So, gerrymandering caused districts to become more and more homogenized and more black and white because people would only move to districts that represented their interests. For instance, in California, where I'm from and born, many people don't know this, but the majority of farmers and outside of the cities are actually very conservative. And how do I put this? The demographics just are part of the politics of the area. If you live in places like San Francisco, you're going to have liberal politics within every aspect and facet in society because they are the ruling majority in that area. So if you're a conservative in a very liberal area, you're going to get hammered with liberal ideas. And you're going to feel under attack. Same thing, vice versa. So I don't know what happened, but slowly through the 90s, the Democrats gave up on doing these long-term economic goals for their parties and constituents. And even the Democratic Party in America was still rather conservative. They were anti-gay, they were anti-immigration. They were very close to the Conservative Party with key differences. Now, why do we see the modern Democratic Party pushing for minorities? It's because they look at the disparities between the demographics in the census. They see that certain groups are rising and certain groups are falling. They're looking to capture groups that can give them political power to reign supreme. Now, why did the Republicans lose a foothold from the 80s in modern times? They lost it because they failed at what they promised to deliver for such a long time. They wanted to promise and deliver a fair, moral society that was backed by people like Pat Buchanan is a good example. William F. Buckley would be considered more of a liberal conservative. You had people that made very good points on paper and sounded really good in the papers, but when it came down to it, they would vote heavily in favor of companies and oftentimes screwing out the republic and the individual as a whole. They suffered because they focused on the group as Republicans in the 90s, and that screwed them over by trying to create identity politics of what a right-winger was. If you look later on in the 2000s, it gives a perfect example of people like Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin was what's called an iconoclast. An iconoclast is someone who is a pinnacle example of what is bad and should be made fun of. She said, you know, we're people from middle America, small town America, and there's no conservatives in the cities, and screw everyone else, I don't care. And that was such a big mistake. She was playing identity politics. She didn't believe what she truly said, and she was being dishonest, and people can sniff and smell dishonesty. But the important thing is she was playing identity politics. And the problem is the label of conservative can be applied to many people. It's not just white Anglo-Saxon Americans. There are very conservative Asians. There are conservative city people. And when you create such a pure message like that, you're doomed to fail because you've cast out anybody that is not you or looks like you. This is the current dilemma facing the Democrats. The Democrats have slowly found themselves more and more consumed by the Clintons and Clintonians of Hillary and Bill Clinton. Due to President Obama at the time, he overspent the Democratic Party's budgets and plunged them into massive debt that they couldn't crawl out of. And for a price, the Clintons offered to pay the DNC the money they owed in return for favors and power. And this is perfectly well known, and it's on public record, you can find it. But it's something that's rarely talked about. And when you have the party bought out by one person, you get one idea. And what that one person says goes. And when you have one person talking, and only one person talking, and you can't challenge them, it's the beginning of tyranny. And when you have a tyrannical party, you're doomed to failure. They already know Hillary's a bad candidate, but they keep pushing her because she owns the party. The idea of conservative has changed in my mind, and it used to mean one thing, and the definition continues to change. Back in the day, conservative to me meant, a Protestant that didn't like any other groups and wanted everything to do to keep them out, hated science, hated the environment, hated everything. Was just, a no good fuddy-duddy that didn't like things. In today's modern definition of conservative from the 90s, we see that modern conservatives are going back to constitutional values, which they were originally based on. So many conservatives believe in the family unit. They believe in gender roles. They believe in a lot of things that are actually worth a lot of your time and soul. But it takes time to explain. And in the current news cycle of that time period, you were at the whim of news networks and their interviews. And they would lead with leading questions to throw you off your game so you wouldn't be able to talk and get your message to the people, because most people found their information through the news, which was editorialized and controlled. One of the good things about today is we have the internet and we can research what people say, read their message, go to their websites and see what their ideas are and what they want for the world. People complain that the world is worse than we are today. That's far from the truth. The world's better than it's ever been. And I can't find the study, but over 40% of the world's population in absolute poverty has been lifted. Less and less people are dying from preventable diseases. water's being cleaned, people's health is being taken care of, infant mortality is on an all-time low, criminality is down worldwide, violence against women and children is down nationally in the US and internationally worldwide. But why do we get the feeling that the world feels worse? That's because of things like Twitter, Facebook, social programs that we claim are social, but are actually not. They're actually quite ill social. If it was truly a social program, or a social website, or a social application, you would use it for things like communication, and which is fine, but it's a limited text base most of the time. And we only show people what we want them to see. They don't see the complete person on those things. So what ends up happening is you get people that will do one of two things. People that really excel in social applications do it for validation. And they generally do it for validation because they don't get validation in other parts of their life. Oftentimes, we seek validation from our peers and from our parents and our children and other people that are important in our lives. And that's usually where most people are content, in validation. But the people that excel at things like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are people that didn't get those validations. They're the people that get validations from seeing clicks, likes, and how do they form that? How do they get that validation they seek so badly? Well, most of the time they get it from creating a false persona or only showing people the part of them they want to show. And when we see all the best parts of everybody and none of the worst, it literally makes them feel like they're inhuman. And it's depressing. And you think your life is crap because of it. And honestly, I would argue that we should turn away from such things. It's good to use communication. I'm not saying don't use Messenger or don't look at your friend's timeline, but just know that people are not showing the complete them. So it showed us the definition of conservative, showed us the definition of social justice on Google. But even Google doesn't know what liberal means these days. Liberal has become a pejorative, it's become a politically charged word. People have different meanings for it. So, a classical liberal, in a sense, would be someone who wants to be able to choose freely, whether it's free speech, free action, free representation, free of the press, free of religion. Liberal is a word that literally means to be free. And that word has changed to mean somebody that's far left leaning in the modern era. That didn't used to always be the case. But why is the left solidifying itself? Why is it coming up with a identity? Well, the reason that is because they're looking to repeat what happened to the Republicans in the 90s and the 2000s. They're creating a litmus test or a purity test because they have an idea of what they want and they only want them. They don't want anyone else to crowd their judgment. It's very easy to see that companies like Google, Facebook, and Twitter, a lot of them, when they first started out, were rather classically liberal. They believed in open speech, open platform, and allowing people to enjoy themselves. But due to different things, things change. Now, a lot of people are saying, oh, they're closing down messages, they're silencing they're silencing conservatives. It's not that they're silencing conservatives as much as it is that they're kowtowing to their advertisers, because their advertisers are the ones that pay the money. Now, they have the user base and they sell their user base to the advertisers. They're not all doing it just because they want to. Most of these companies are interested in profit. They're a profit-driven company. Now, the question is, why would their advertisers demand conservative voices or alternative voices to be shut down? The answer is because they're a legitimate source of news and criticism that people want to hear. And their audiences are growing, and that scares traditional media. So traditional media, in part with advertisers, are pushing through collective bargaining and threatening to take away their ad spaces if they don't change. So like I was talking about the far left and the far right, they oftentimes will go so far in one direction that they end up mirroring themselves or resembling each other. Some people say the horseshoe effect or the horseshoe theory is inaccurate or it's not a good example, and I disagree. I think it's a really good example of looking in the mirror. The difference between the left and the right, or the liberal conservative, or the Democrat and Republic, oftentimes comes down to what is sovereign, what should make the most choices. The Republicans believe that the individual is sovereign, that the person should choose. The left believes that the group is sovereign and that your group identity defines what you need. And the thing is, it's easy to go to one side or the other and say, aha, my side is right, the other side is wrong. A great example of a left-right dichotomy would be like yin and yang. Another good example is, oh, I just had it. Sorry. But anyways, if one side goes too far to one side or the other, they start to mirror each other in their authoritarianness. Because closer to the center and the left and the right, you're going to have more liberal choices, be able to choose. And that's where the center is probably the best. But the far left and the far right are very authoritarian. They want to have absolute choice. And the reason they need absolute choice for only them and their group is because they know they're going to make bad choices for the individual and for the group. But it's going to be good for the person deciding. A good example of the person versus the group, another yin and yang example that I remembered now, is nature versus nurture. Some people believe that you're 100% naturally born. Your traits are given to you at birth, and you are fated to become the person you're supposed to be. Some people believe that you're a blank slate and everything is nurturing and your environment is everything. Nurture is a great example of the left. It's group identity. It's how you grow up. Trait identification is very much on the right. Traits are individual, soul to the person. As you can see, many things have a yin and yang, or left and right, a duality that both need each other, that are symbiotic and codependent. The left needs the right as much as the right needs the left. Anyway, that's all for today. I just kind of wanted to get a little talk about how I see the left and the right. I just want to leave you with this one quote because it's very similar to what the problem is with social justice these days. This is from the author C.S. Lewis. He wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, but I just wanted to read it to you before we end out. Of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under the omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, but the cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. What that means is it's better to live under a tyrant who takes and steals, because at least his satisfaction will be satiated for a time. But somebody like a moral busybody, aka a social justice, will never be happy. They will never fully find the utopia they seek. And if you look at communism, that's why thousands and thousands of people died in the process, because not one person can agree on what the group's struggle is, what the group's identity is, what the group's cause is, and then when is it reached? And if it is reached, what do we do to continue life? That's it for today. After this, I'm going to probably start looking at articles and kind of doing the same theme, just looking at them. I don't want to do a reaction piece like most YouTubers. I want to look at what is beyond the reaction. Where do things play out? Where do we go from here? What is this end goal of their ideals? What do they want? Anyways, that's it for now. This has been Stigmata Miasmata, and with your daily dose of poison. Have a good day and good night. Goodbye.